Good morning. This is Valerie Leonard. I am the founder of Nonprofit Utopia. I want to say welcome to everyone who is participating either through Crowdcast, through Facebook Live, or through YouTube Live. Thank you so much. And if by any chance you're watching on YouTube Live or Facebook Live, feel free to join us here in Crowdcast. I did include a link to this crowdcast right in the description. But in the event that you don't see it, you can join us at crowdcast.io/e/30 day compliance 5, the numeral 5. Alrighty. This is our third session for the Compliance Challenge. In fact, the month of May is Compliance Month here in the Nonprofit Utopia. We realized over the years that, nonprofit compliance is a huge issue, around the United States. Almost 20% of nonprofit organizations at some point or another have had problems losing their tax exempt status just because they didn't file Form 990 for 3 years in a row. And that's just one issue. Compliance stems across a number of things. And then I've also noticed in my own practice that regardless of what I'm working on with my clients, that it could be fundraising, it could be finance, it could be board development. All roads lead to nonprofit compliance. And in fact, people have had problems that have kept them from raising funds. Alrighty, so in our first week, we focused on the role of the community and Guide Star, as well as the foundations in compliance and holding one another accountable, as well as the potential to use GuideStar profiles to increase fundraising. In our session from 2 days ago, we focused on the role of the state in terms of, we focused on the role of the IRS, and we focused on Form 990 as well as Form 941. So those are your annual returns as well as your payroll taxes. Today we're going to focus on the state, and we're going to, and when I say the state, I'm talking about the state of Illinois. And if you happen to be watching and you're not from the state of Illinois, then just look at what we're doing and try to match it with your state's counterparts. And if you have any questions, you can email me at valeriefleonard@nonprofitutopia.com. And today we're going to focus on the roles of the Illinois Attorney General's office as well as the Department of Revenue in terms of, how they help nonprofits in their compliance. All right, and before we go, if you have any questions, you can post in the chat room. I noticed I did not post the link to the handouts. I'll do that, just as soon as this is over. So if you have registered, you'll see a link to the handouts after we sign off. I just didn't have time to upload that. And the handouts will include instructions as well as downloadable, fillable forms for the state. So for every handout that we go over, every form that we go over, we will have that in your handouts as well as instructions. And for those of you who are members of the Nonprofit Utopia community, feel free to post any questions or concerns that you have in the Nonprofit Utopia community, and that way I can answer any questions, and other people from the community who might have the same question can also see that answer. All right, so we are going to get started, and we're hoping to, after all this is done, after we go through all of these exercises, that you will in fact be able to bring yourself up to compliance within 30 days of us going through this. All right, so our third this is our third week, and this is actually session 3, not necessarily our third week. This is our second week and our third session. So we're going to focus on the roles of the Attorney General for the state of Illinois, as well as the Illinois Department of Revenue. Okay, so just bear with me. I want to make the proper adjustment. Okay. All right, so just to give you a little background, we're Nonprofit Utopia. We're the ideal community for emerging nonprofit leaders. We try to create a situation where we have younger folks who can learn from more seasoned people like myself, have a very safe exchange of information in a safe environment. And our mission is to train the next generation of ethical leaders, and our vision is to train at least 50,000 people around the world between now and 2033. We have a number of professional development opportunities. You know, when we're not under COVID-19 threats, we do have activities that are in person, but since we have to shelter in, we're going to be doing a lot of that stuff online. We also have a number of webinars and a number of online classes. And every month we focus on a different issue. And this month we're focusing on nonprofit compliance. And as for myself, I'm the founder of Nonprofit Utopia. My name is Valerie Leonard. My focus is on organizational development as well as community development. I help folks, and when I say folks, I help nonprofit leaders to develop their own leadership skills while they develop their own organizations. I'm also the host of Nonprofit Utopia, and I teach courses with the University of Illinois in nonprofit management, and I also teach at Roosevelt University in social enterprise. And we don't have quite as much to cover today. I think this will be a much shorter session than what we had been doing. GuideStar had some significant information the first week, and then our second session with IRS, we had to go into significant detail. But the state equivalents, are not quite as detailed. But nonetheless, we're going to focus on Form CO1, CO2, AG 990 IL, which is the state of Illinois' counterpart to the Form 990. We're also going to focus on the Reg 1 and 941. So these are forms that are put out by the Attorney General's office as well as the Department of Revenue. Okay, so just for review, we're going to talk about who the major players are in nonprofit compliance. And as you can see, there are 8 major players. And basically, the reason that we have such stringent nonprofit compliance is we want to make sure that we not only strengthen our management system so we can make better decisions, but we want to have increased efficiency, transparency, and accountability. And this, in turn, if we're proactive, we can use this also to increase our fundraising. So there are 8 major players. Again, we start off with the nonprofit organization. As you can see, it takes a village. So the nonprofit organization board and staff play a role, and we shared that 2 sessions ago. The staff generally prepares the documentation and the board signs off on it. From a legal perspective, the board is legally responsible for whatever information is disclosed, and if there are any problems as a result of those disclosure, then the board is responsible. The staff obviously should be, competent to prepare those forms. And then we also have the organization's auditor, And the auditor prepares the annual audit, and they'll provide technical assistance in that compliance process. They can either help you provide the Form 990, or in most cases, they will prepare the 990 for you. It's that much easier. And then we've got the Internal Revenue Service, or the IRS. You have to provide Form 990, which is an informational return in lieu of taxes. And then you do the Form 941 if you have a payroll. So if you have employees that are on regular payroll, then you do Form 941. And then you've got the Attorney General's office, and they are focused on registration as well as some education, and also the Form AG 990. And then we've got the Illinois Department of Revenue, where they take in the Illinois portion of your payroll taxes through Form 941. And then you've got the Reg 1, which is your initial registration. And then you've got the Illinois Secretary of State, and you file an annual report with them. And then you've got the organization's funders that you have to file reports with. And then in exchange for your tax exemption, you are accountable to the general public. Alrighty, so let's get to why we're here. We're going to look at the role of the Attorney General's office. Good morning, Annie. How are you? Thank you so much for joining, and I will make sure that I have handouts. I'm going to post the handouts right after we're done. Alrighty. And if you have any questions, be sure to post. And anyone who's in the forum, if you have any questions, feel free to post. If you're watching on YouTube Live, feel free to post. I won't be able to see your comments until after this is done. And if you're watching on Facebook Live, then post your questions. And better yet, you can come join us. And I did include a link on the Facebook page. Alrighty, so we're going to be talking about the role of the Illinois Attorney General's office. And generally speaking, the Attorney General, regardless of who that person is the chief legal officer for the state, for the state of Illinois. He's the lawyer. And for now, our current Attorney General is Kwame Raoul. And he has the prerogative of conducting legal affairs for our state. And under Illinois law, as it relates to nonprofits, every nonprofit organization needs to do an annual filing. They also need to do initial registration with the Attorney General's office. And any fundraiser, if you're a fundraising consultant, then you are going to be required to file as well. You have to do an annual report. And the good thing about sharing this information is there's significant transparency, such that anyone from the community, anyone from a university, any potential donor can go to the Illinois Attorney General's website and search, do a search and get a sense for whether or not you're in good standing with that office. But the forms that you file, such as the AG 990, will also give a sense for how much money you spent, how much money is coming in, and also give a sense for what percentage of that money is spent on fundraising and administrative activities. And for nonprofits, we tend to encounter, and I'm saying we, I'm not a nonprofit, and Nonprofit Utopia is not a nonprofit, but I work with nonprofits. So nonprofit organizations will encounter the Attorney General's office usually at 2 points, and hopefully it's not 3. Let's hope, and I'm not even covering number 3, but since I thought of it, I'll talk about the third one. So during registration, when you are letting the state know that you're contemplating fundraising, and legally you should not be engaging in any fundraising activities until after you have registered with the Attorney General's office. All right. And then you also encounter the Attorney General's office when you're filing your annual reports, and those will be the AG 990IL. All right. Now, the third instance where you hope and pray you never encounter the Attorney General's office is if someone files a complaint against the organization for, some practice that is illegal or unethical, or you're late filing with your forms. All right. So the Attorney General's office also supports the organizations, and they support nonprofit organizations through their website, through technical assistance, and ongoing public awareness and education. So this is a screenshot of what the website looks like today. And as you can see, the scope of what the Illinois Attorney General's office does is very, very broad. But what we're focused on today is how they help nonprofit organizations. So they have a page, Building Better Charities, and that's focused on how they can help and support nonprofit organizations. And this is what that page looks like, at least the top part of the page. So there is a searchable database, and then there are downloadable forms that you can fill out to file your annual reports. There are also forms that you can fill out to register as a fundraiser, register for fundraising as an organization. There are links to different laws and best practices and other resources. So I suggest very strongly that you visit this website early and often, just to keep abreast of what the state is doing as it relates to nonprofit organizations. And some of the resources that they provide, and I think I mentioned some of them already. So if you go on to the Illinois Attorney General's office website, go to the web page, and this is the charitable, Building Better Charities. You'll see a charitable database, and that will give you a database of Illinois nonprofits that are in good standing. Now, first of all, don't confuse this with the Secretary of State, because they have their own database. It is perfectly possible to be found in good standing with the Illinois Secretary of State, meaning that you have filed your annual report with the Secretary of State, but not be in good standing with the Attorney General's office. So if you have not filed Form AG 990 or Form CO1, CO2, or CO3, whichever forms are applicable, then you won't be in their database, right? You'll also find rules and statutes. And when we talk about statutes, we're talking about the state law governing nonprofits. And that's always good to know, because you want to make sure you understand the boundaries within which you can operate. And then you will also find nonprofit checklists for starting a nonprofit organization and registering your nonprofit. So I would strongly suggest, if you look at this checklist, you also look at the checklist of the Secretary of State. Some may focus on some areas more deeply than the other. And they also have articles on the major duties of board members. And Nonprofit Utopia also, recently we've done a series on board governance. So you might want to check out some of our old crowdcasts and webinars on board development. And then again, as I indicated before, they have all the major forms that you need to process. So you can download those forms, you can download the instructions, and and if you want, you can even file electronically, all from the Attorney General's office. And as I indicated before, I will have a link to all of those forms after we're done with this today. All right, so this is a screenshot of Form CO1. And with the state of Illinois Attorney General's office, before you can do any fundraising legally. So if you haven't filed these forms then you are not, and you're fundraising, then you're not fundraising legally. Legally, you should file these forms before you engage in fundraising. However, a number of people don't know this. If you haven't worked with someone who understands this process, if you haven't worked with an attorney, you just, this is just not something that comes to your head naturally. Sometimes we're so focused on filing for tax exempt status that we don't think about what we need to do at the state level. And it's not uncommon for organizations to be in operation for years before they find out that they have to file this form. And sometimes if the Illinois Attorney General finds out that you're fundraising and you haven't filed this form, you might get a friendly letter to remind you to file the form. So you will file Form CO1 if your organization is a startup. And I strongly recommend that if you are doing the paperwork to get tax exempt status, as you're doing the work for Form 1023, with the IRS, file Form CO1 as well, just as soon as you get your paperwork back from the Secretary of State. You would file Form CO2 if your organization is less than a year old, but as I indicated before, it's not uncommon for organizations to not even know that they have to file this form. So in those cases, I would strongly recommend that you file Form CO1 and CO2, and then you file Form CO3 if your organization is a religious organization. And if you're filing on time, and when I say on time, this is before you engage in any fundraising, then your filing fee is $15. If you are filing late, and a late fee applies for those organizations that are engaging in fundraising, but they haven't filed Form CO1. And the way the Attorney General understands who and where you are is, remember, you have to do a filing with the Secretary of State's office. So they do a cross-reference. So all those organizations that are filed with the Secretary of State and have not filed with the Attorney General's office, you're going to get a reminder, and you may get a letter assessing you for $200. If you have any revenue generated prior to filing Form CO1 or CO2, then you owe a late filing fee. If they send you a letter telling you that you are liable for this $200 fee and you have not engaged in any fundraising, that is, if your organization is just an organization on paper only, then you can write a letter and indicate, that you're not liable for that $200 late fee because you haven't engaged in any fundraising. If you have any questions after this, or even while we're going on, just let me know. Just post in the chat room, or you can email me at ValerieFLeonard@nonprofitutopia.com. Alrighty, so when you submit your Form CO1 and CO2, these are the attachments that you have to include. So you have to include a $15 registration fee. And if you're late, and when I say late, that means you have already started raising funds without letting the Attorney General know that you have engaged. And you let the Attorney General know by filling out this form. All right. So if you have to file a late fee, that's going to be $200 in addition to that $15. All right, and then you've got the charitable organization registration statement, so Form CO1, and then you've got a completed Form 90 and AG 990, so that's the state and federal form. And then you've got a list of names, mailing addresses, and daytime phone numbers for all of your officers, directors, and/or trustees. And then a copy of your Form 1023 or 1024. So those are your filings, for 501c3 organizations, or I believe a 1024 could be, I'm not sure, I'm just guessing at this point, is for your 501c4s. All right, and your C4s are, they don't pay taxes, but your donations to them are not tax exempt. All right. So, if applicable, you have to include copies of all your contracts with professional fundraisers. So, there are certain fundraisers who are licensed and they have to register with the Attorney General. So, if you have contracts with them, then you have to include a contract with them, as a setup, I'm sorry, as an attachment. And then, if applicable, if your organization is a religious organization, then you attach Form CO3. And this is a screenshot of Form AG990IL. Again, this is just a state counterpart to your Form 990. And you can see it's a much simpler form summarizing your financial information. They don't ask you to go into a whole heck of a lot of detail about what your board members do and what your activities are. They just want to get a list of your directors, want to get a sense for your activities, and when I say activities, your finances. And you can get a quick and dirty look at this form and get a sense for whether or not organizations are being wise stewards over their funds, in terms of how much goes into program versus fundraising and administration. And then finally, we want to talk about the role of the Illinois Department of Revenue. And this is a screenshot as it stands today of the front page of the Illinois Department of Revenue's webpage. And you want to click on to this business tab. And after, I believe, 2 clicks, you will end up on another page that I'll show you a few slides down. And that will give you more information about the role of the Department of Revenue as it relates to nonprofits. So basically, the responsibility of the Department of Revenue is to serve as the tax collection agency for the state of Illinois. And remember, you are a tax-exempt organization. But if you have payroll, then you have to pay taxes, payroll taxes. And if you have not yet gotten exemption from sales tax, then you will still be charged sales tax. So they're going to be collecting sales tax from you if you have not filled out the proper paperwork or if you don't qualify. And typically, chambers of commerce don't qualify for sales tax exemption, and there are a couple other classifications. So I would admonish you to go through this process. I believe, chambers of commerce and economic development agencies, for whatever reason, tend to not qualify. But I would say submit an application anyway. You never know. And you typically work with the state of Illinois Department of Revenue when you register your business. So when you first start your organization, you should register with the Department of Revenue. And if you're an ongoing concern, and if you have not yet done that, then you should do that as soon as possible. And then again, you want to also apply for sales tax exemption and pay payroll taxes. So the way they support the nonprofit sector is obviously they've got a website with resources that you can download the fillable forms or you can file electronically. They've got searchable databases of organizations that are in good standing. They've got ongoing education and public awareness campaigns. And then they provide technical assistance, by telephone. And then occasionally, if you have, a large enough group or your group has a relationship, you might be able to get people out to, explain what it is that they do. Now, again, when you're doing your initial setup for your organization. So when you're filing for Form 1023 with the IRS for tax exemption, this is the time when you should be doing Form Reg 1 to let the state of Illinois Department of Revenue know that you're in existence. So typically you're letting them know, who the organization is, what activities you're engaged in, and who the officers are. All right, so we've got a copy of that form. We will be providing a link to all of our handouts, and this will be one of the forms as well as the instructions. And if you're ongoing concern and you have not filled this out, again, this is something you need to complete as soon as possible. So this is the page that the Illinois Department of Revenue has for nonprofit organizations. And you're most concerned about this first link, which is, a link to a form that you will use to apply for exemption from sales taxes. Again, just because you're a nonprofit doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be exempt, but it's always worth a try. Let the state tell you you're not qualified. So this is what the form looks like. It used to be where you could write a letter and just explain who you are and say that you want to file for exemption from sales taxes. But as of last year, they have incorporated a new form, which is Tax 1, and this is an application for sales tax exemption. So this is basically, garnering the same information that they would have asked for in a letter, but I guess this form makes sure that they get it, get all the same information from everybody in a uniform manner. So in addition to that form, if you are applying for the first time, you need to attach a copy of your articles of incorporation. And if you're not incorporated, then you have to provide bylaws or your constitution. You also have to have your IRS letter, the most recent financial statement, and if you're a church or a religious organization, then you don't have to give them your financial statement because of separation between the church and the state. And then you want to also give a brief narrative that explains the purposes, functions, and activities of your organization and marketing collateral. And then I want to go back to that bullet point where it talks about a brief narrative that explains purposes, functions, and activities of your organizations. It is here where they can get a really good sense of whether or not the activities in which you're engaging will qualify for sales tax exemption. So you want to pay very close attention to how you're describing your organization and making sure that it serves a tax exempt purpose, education or charitable purpose. Okay, so if you are applying for renewal, then you're going to obviously, submit this form, but you want to have a current copy of your exemption letter, and it'll have your E99 number on it. And then you'll have that same list of things that you would have for your for your first time. All right, so again, we talked about payroll tax withholding last time, and that time we focused on your 941 at the federal level. But as you know, that not only do you have federal withholding, you also have state withholding, and your state withholding are, those are generally due at the same time as your federal withholding, but you might have so you do that quarterly. So after the first quarter, you have a month to pay your withholding. So that would be after, okay, so March 31st is the end of your first quarter. At the end of April, you get to file. Anything after April 30th would be considered late. And you also not only have to file, but you also have to pay. All right, so you pay quarterly, you pay in April, July, October, and January. So January would be from December of the previous year. And there are penalties, so you are assessed penalties for paying late, and you're also assessed penalties for filing late. And then there's also a penalty for any bounce checks. So the penalty for late filing is the lesser of $250 or 2% of the tax required to be shown due. All right. And if the return is filed on time but is incomplete, then you have 30 days to make the corrections or make sure that it is complete. Now, if you're late such that you get a notice from the state, then you have to pay, in addition to the penalty for late filing, then you're going to have to pay the penalty for not filing, right? So that will be equal to the greater of $250 or 2% of the tax shown due. And this is an additional payment. So, at that point, you're responsible for tier 1 and tier 2. And the second penalty can't exceed $5,000. And remember, this is in addition to all of those federal penalties. So you really, really want to pay attention to your Form 941s at the state as well as the federal level. And I know this gets really, really complicated, and I would suggest very strongly that you work with an accountant or bookkeeper who is well versed in payroll, and even better yet, get a service like ADP to do this for you, and then send you a report, and you can just reconcile it on your financial statements. All right, so the penalties for late filing and payment of state payroll taxes. So the penalty is based on the number of days. So if you're anywhere from 1 to 30 days late, then it's 2% penalty. And then anywhere over 30 days is a 10% penalty. All right, so I promised you that would be short. I don't know about sweet, but it was much shorter because the paperwork at the state level is not quite as intense. But if you have any questions or comments, please share them before we go. And again, I apologize, I don't have a link to the handouts. I will make sure that I post those just as soon as we're done. Okay, so it doesn't seem that we have any questions or comments. So we've got one more session, and our next session is going to focus on the roles of IDES as well as the role of the Secretary of State, and those will be short as well. I just want to make sure that I expose you to the full array of compliance as it relates to state and federal filings. Okay, so without further ado, I am going to end this broadcast, and I will see you on the other side. Take care.